The first part of Luke chapter 8, Luke points us to Jesus, the teacher, as Jesus speaks in parables. And the sense of those parables is that we should seek to hear, not to listen, but also to understand and to obey Jesus. Then in the second part of the chapter, we move from Jesus's words to Jesus's actions, a sense of Jesus's authority being demonstrated. Why should we listen to him? Why should we obey him? So have a look at verse 26 through to the end of the chapter. Have a moment to read that for yourselves. And then first of all, in verse 26 to 40, we see Jesus crossing Galilee to a region sometimes referred to as the Gerasenes or the Gadarenes. There's some discussion about exactly where the place was, some challenges around some textual variations in the copies of the manuscripts. But we are probably looking at the sort of the eastern side of Galilee, that kind of area. And when Jesus crosses, he's greeted by quite the commotion. There's a man who has been living in the tombs amongst the graves, the caves, and that kind of thing that would have contained the bodies of the deceased, away from the city. He's demon possessed, and we know from the text that the demon or demons, as we'll find out, would overpower him, but then give him strength to be able to overpower others. But that power, that strength, in contrast to the power, the authority that Jesus has, is destructive, and it causes him to be isolated as the people try to chain him up. But they don't want him near them in their town. They don't want anything to do with him. And so they they isolate him out. They try to contain him, try to restrict him, and the demons themselves drive him. But they can't contain him. He breaks free from shackles. Well, he comes out to meet Jesus, and there, when he meets Jesus, Jesus commands the demon to come out of him. As a response, is it from him? Is it from the demon? There seems to be some conflation together of the two, the way that the demon is possessing, controlling, influencing, becoming intertwined in his life in that very unhealthy way. But the response is that he cries out in a loud voice, uh, identifies Jesus as the Son of the Most High. There's a recognition of Jesus' identity, but says, "I don't want anything to do with you. Go away from me. You don't torment me." This fear that Jesus is going to cause him pain, cause him suffering, all sorts of things to pick up their pastorally in your own time. Jesus then asks his name. Now, I've heard people pick up this passage and use this as a kind of a textbook for how to do exorcisms. I wouldn't do that anyway with the Gospels. That's not why they're here. But also, I think they've misread it, because you hear about people going in where there's a belief case of demon possession, and they start addressing the demon, talking to the demon and asking its name and getting all sorts of answers back. That's not actually what you see Jesus doing here. There are times when it's uncertain about who is responding, the man, the demon, both shaped in together. But it's the man that Jesus speaks to. What is your name? And in fact, it's the man, I would suggest, who answers primarily. It's his voice, Legion. Uh, Now, Jesus will have known the name, but there's a sense here of inviting him to identify himself, his character, his reputation. And as we are seeing, his whole life, his whole status, whole identity is wrapped up in the way that the demons have taken control. Legion, because he's been possessed by not just one demon, but many. But then it's the demons who beg him and beg Jesus not to banish them to the abyss. Again, you might want to check out some of the detail. There's some sort of perceptions, some Jewish sort of eschatological sort of stuff going on here. You might want to look at the book of Revelation. But the imagery in the Bible is that there is a place, a permanent place of banishment for demons, that they will be thrown into this abyss away from God's presence. And they're saying, we don't want to go there yet. We don't want to meet our final judgment. So they beg, they want to go into a herd of pigs that are nearby. And interestingly, Jesus allows it. The demons are cast out, they come out of the man, and they enter the pigs. And the result is that the herd rush down the bank into the lake and are drowned. When the people from the town come out, they see the man. He is put right, he's in his right mind, he's clothed, he's a new person. But they also hear the report from the herdsman of what's happened to the pigs. And they beg Jesus to go away. They see his power as unwelcome in their town as the demonic power had been before. Getting some discussion around what they were doing with pigs. Should they have been herding them? Pigs and pork were classified as unclean. Jews were not meant to include them in their diet. There's the possibility that in that region you get a mixture of Jews, often Hellenistic Jews, or those that have adopted Greek culture and language, and actual Gentiles that have moved into that kind of region. Are they Gentiles? Does it not really matter if they're keeping pigs? Well, that is possible. My inclination is to assume that there are Jews there because Jesus' mission has been, up until this point, to Jews. So there is a question about whether or not they should have had the pigs with them in the first place, and whether or not there's a challenge there about what are they going to put first, this man's life or their livelihood, even if that livelihood brings them into confrontation with what God commands. And there's also the question about why Jesus lets the demons do this. He could have just said, no, I'm casting you out. He doesn't have this debate with other demons. Is it some kind of act of mercy? Well, I don't think Jesus is particularly interested in mercy to demons. Their fate is sealed. They're going to that abyss one day. Does Jesus want to give them a chance? No. Does Jesus want to extend their time here? No. And in fact, I want to suggest that what we see is that as they put themselves into the pigs, as they hurtle away, as the pigs die, that then actually the demons are left disembodied. They are left with nowhere else to go but into that abyss. That they can't, they might be able to briefly postpone their end destination, but they can't stop it. And perhaps that's partly why Jesus allows this here, to show that. It's a warning, as a teaching for us. But also I think what he does is he makes visual the destructive power of the demons. It's not that they are in this man and he's destructive. Their nature is to harm and to destroy. And it's important that we teach clearly that the devil, that he may offer and present himself as attractive, as offering something good, is in fact dangerous and destructive and brings death. After casting out the demons, Jesus returns back to his side of Galilee. And a man called Jairus comes out. He is one of the leaders, one of the elders, one of the rulers of the synagogue. He's one of the leading men. And he begs Jesus, come and heal my daughter. It's his only daughter. I think that echo of um, an only son being healed previously and brought back from the dead. Well, here's this 12-year-old girl. She's beloved by him. And so Jesus goes with Jairus. They're heading along, and as they are walking, there's the crowd pressing in on him, and one specific woman who is suffering from bleeding, bleeding from the womb, an issue of blood. And this has also been going on for 12 years. This woman, she spent all her money on the doctors, and no one's been able to heal her, no one's been able to help. She comes up, comes from behind. She doesn't come and speak to Jesus. Perhaps there's a sense of shame. This would have made her ceremonially unclean. So instead of coming to Jesus, she reaches and grabs hold of at the bottom of his cloak, and she's healed. And Jesus is aware that there's been contact and that his power has gone out from him. Not that Jesus has been drained of his power, but that he's aware of that contact, the connection, that somebody has come and exercised faith and reached to get hold and receive from him. And he says, "Who's touched me?" And that's around him, like, what you want about? There's a huge crowd here. How can you avoid somebody coming into contact with you, Jesus? That's just the reality of being in a crowd. But he knows that someone has come specifically. So she comes before him. Jesus will not allow her to grasp the healing and to go away without a real meeting with him, and that meeting is going to be public, not to shame and not to rebuke and not to set barriers and hurdles up. But rather, this, I believe, is for her good, so that she will know that she has been healed, and so that anybody who's got any questions about her will know that she's been healed, and also that Jesus can affirm her faith. This must have been very frustrating to Jairus. There's a delay. He's concerned about his daughter. And in fact, whilst this is happening, whilst he's still speaking, there's someone who comes out from his house. This is verse 49. They say, "Don't bother going. Your daughter's dead. It's too late." Verse 50, Jesus heard it and he says, "Don't be afraid. Only believe that she will be saved." Don't be afraid. Only believe that she will be saved. What powerful words. Don't be afraid. Believe. Have faith. And to be saved. The word, by the way, for being saved and being healed is the same word. Jesus is our Saviour. Jesus is our healer. There's a connection between the two. They get to the house, verse 51, and Jesus only allows a few people, Peter, John, James, and mum and dad, to come in with him. There's people there that have turned up to be the professional mourners. There'll be others, family, extended family, genuinely there out of grief. But Jesus doesn't want a crowd or a commotion for this. But he says, stop crying, she's only asleep. He's mocked for this. Verse 50, verse 53. Like, she's dead. What do you know about? She's only asleep. Now, Jesus will also talk about Lazarus falling asleep. Jesus knows what he's talking about. Jesus uses that euphemism for death, of falling asleep, not to soften the blow, but because death is just that. It is sleep. When we trust in the power of God to raise the dead, it's temporary. And in this case, she's asleep. She is going to be brought back to life here in this world. By the way, I think we've also got to be very clear here. There might be some that would be tempted to say that Jesus knows something like that she's just in a coma or something. Now, they would have been alert to comas, they would have been alert to that idea of asleep. But Luke is emphasizing they know that she's dead. They've done all the checks. There's no pulse, there's no heartbeat, there's no breathing. She has died. But Jesus comes in, he takes her hand and says, "Child, get up." And verse 56, her spirit returned, and she got up at once. Then he gave orders that she be given something to eat. And her parents are astonished, they're astounded. But as is often done, he instructs them to tell no one what had happened. Jesus has the authority to cast out demons. Jesus has the authority to heal the sick. Jesus has the authority to make the unclean clean. Jesus has the authority to raise the dead. And we often go straight to these types of passages and say, look, this is authority seen in the signs and wonders that Jesus does that point to his deity. Jesus can do this because he is God. Now, some people push back against this. I noticed that N.T. Wright in some of his work pushes back against this and says, actually, when you look, if Jesus is able to heal the sick, cast out demons, raise the dead, actually he's doing what prophets like Elijah and Elisha have done. So is this pointing to his divinity or simply to his humanity? And on one level, I think he's right. Jesus is Son of God, and in Luke we've seen that means he can trace his ancestry back to Adam. He's fully human, and there's a sense in which what Jesus is doing is what he is able to do as God's man in the situation. But I think that N.T. Wright over argues the case. Because yes, Jesus is doing what other men have done before him. But notice two things. First, there's a sense in which Jesus just does this naturally, effortlessly, consistently, permanently. It's not something that he has to wait for God's Spirit to come on him from time to time. He doesn't need to receive the authority to do this from anywhere else. It is naturally his authority. And that is different from other people. So there's a difference in degree and intensity, in even in the nature of how these miracles and signs are happening and taking place. But also what we see is that as well as healing, so having the authority to heal the sick, raise the dead, to cast out demons, what we've seen about Jesus is that he also has the authority back earlier in the gospel, to forgive sin, and all of these become linked in together, that take us beyond even the authority and power of prophets. So I don't think Jesus is just doing what holy, godly people could do. Rather, this is pointing to his deity, but he is doing it as the Son of Man. He is doing it as the one that is fully human. So, what I would suggest is that when we look at Jesus' authority, we see it because he is both fully God and fully man. We see it in his full person, and we don't separate his divinity and humanity, his divinity and his humanity, and isolate them from each other. We don't mix and confuse those natures together, so that that Jesus becomes some kind of hybrid, but nor do we separate out and remove his human identity, his human nature from his divine nature. For Jesus, the two are integral together. And so Jesus has authority as the one who has come, fully God and fully man, as our Saviour.